You're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy Focus.
The Fantasy Focus Football Podcast is presented by Geico. It is December 31st. We done made it, people. Final day of 2020. Field Yates, Mike Clay, Stefania Bell, Daniel Dopp, hanging out with you. Final show of the 2020 regular season here on the Fantasy Focus. And in very 2020 style, we have a COVID-19 update. Oh, to begin the show, and I'm just going to pass it along here because we found out about it like 10 minutes before the show began. The Cleveland Browns had 2 more players test positive this morning for COVID-19. Obviously, the team has been dealing with COVID issues for the past week or so. 9 players already on the COVID-19 list, so 2 more being added, potentially 4 being subtracted, those being the 4 wide receivers that were high-risk close contacts, Jarvis Landry amongst those who were placed on the list technically on Monday, but we know the close contact occurred last Saturday. But anyways, we digress. We are going to get into a full show for those that are still plummeting through their final week of the fantasy football season. Cool, congratulations. For those of you that are just hanging out because you enjoy the fun, we love you. We appreciate you. We're excited that you are here. So let's get right into all the injury news, and there are a lot of injuries to dive into, and nobody better to do that. Seriously, nobody. And the incomparable Stefania Bell. Stefania, hello to you. And let's begin with injuries, which technically isn't an injury. Unfortunately, very sad news out of Minnesota for Dalvin Cook and his family.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook left. We heard first from Courtney Cronin. It was a personal emergency that he was leaving the team. Later found out it was the unexpected passing of his father, and he apparently said that he felt he needed to be there for his siblings. Dalvin Cook, so loyal to the team, actually thinking about whether he should stay or go be with his family, obviously left to go be with his family, and the team has offered their condolences. Dalvin Cook, 1,557 rushing yards this year, 16 rushing touchdowns. His impact certainly felt. Alexander Mattison, his backup, expected to start if he gets cleared from the concussion protocol. Mattison himself has had issues between illness and a concussion, but now hopefully will be back this week in place of Dalvin Cook.
If I'm not mistaken, it was an appendectomy for Alexander Mattison about a month or so ago. He's been off the field for quite a bit of time. Remember, Mike, there was one game this year where he had a feature role. It was a game in which Dalvin Cook left at halftime, and Alexander Madison still finished with 112 yards on 20 carries. He is a top 15 running back play in your rankings, number 12 in my running back rankings for Week 17.
Yeah, and actually, I would say he had the featured role the next week too, right? That was the game that Cook missed, and most people started him. We pushed him as a starter, certainly a great DFS play, and he disappointed. But something to think about in that game. They only ran 50 plays. That's a really low number to only run 50 offensive snaps. 36 of those were passes. If I'm not mistaken, Atlanta had a big lead in that game, and they were forced to throw the ball quite a bit. Madison still had 10 carries and 2 targets on just 23 snaps in that game. Amir Abdullah and Mike Boone, 3 carries and 3 targets on 19 snaps. He was still the featured guy, even though it was an unusually low-volume, pass-heavy game for Minnesota. I do think he'll be the featured guy. They'll take a long look at him. He's a candidate for 20 to 25 touches in this game. I fully believe that. Yes, if they're trailing, maybe you see a little more Amir Abdullah. They'll work in Mike Boone a little bit, but it should be the Alex Madison show. So I do think he is a viable RB2 with upside.
If we were to rewind to the beginning of this year, some might have taken Dalvin Cook number 1 overall based off how he's performed so far this season. The player that we actually took number 1 overall was, of course, Christian McCaffrey and Stefania. A year of 3-star performances may be it for CMC. Is he likely to go on Sunday?
He is not, Field, and I think this shaped up to start looking different last week. Matt Rule's tone changed. He started off the week saying that McCaffrey was doubtful to play last week and really didn't offer any optimism for his return. And it feels like we've just going through the motions, quite frankly, for McCaffrey this week. I don't think anybody really thought that he would play. And, you know, it's interesting. At the end of the year, we always talk about, or why don't they shut him down, or why don't they have him go? I think they really thought Christian McCaffrey would come back, and McCaffrey was pushing to come back. And then when it became apparent that it was going to be more than a 1-week issue for that quad strain, things sort of went downhill. McCaffrey will have plenty of time to get healthy, but it's certainly worth noting, you know, he had 3 different injuries this year, and you wonder if this latest one, the quad strain, was in part just him trying to recapture his conditioning after being absent for so long. But either way, Christian McCaffrey is out, and Mike Davis likely to miss this week as well for the Panthers.
High ankle sprain for Mike Davis suffered last week in that win over Washington. All I got to say, shout out to you, Mike Davis. You stepped up in a major way this year. Over 1,000 total yards from scrimmage for a player that, again, as I reminded on the podcast a couple of days ago, it was cut. It was cut in the middle of the year last year by Chicago, who, until like the last 5 weeks, we know really could have used a boost in their running game. Mike Davis, though, likely out for Week 17. Just hats off to Mike Davis, one of the best waiver wire ads of this season. Mike, who is left over, though, in that Carolina backfield?
Yeah, Rodney Smith, right? How about that? I don't think anybody – did we mention his name once all offseason?
Not once.
Not one time.
Once.
He has cracked that roster. He's 3rd on the depth chart. He'll be the lead guy in this game. No more than a flex. They're playing the Saints. They've allowed the fewest fantasy points to running backs. Very low upside in this matchup. You'll see some Trenton Cannon mixed in. And Miles Hartsfield, who he's a very versatile player. I believe he had some special teams work. He's played safety. He's been their slot corner the past few weeks. He's played some running back. He may get a few touches here as well. The fullback will be mixed in there. You'll see Curtis Samuel.
I love
a lot of guys.
Yeah.
It's a long way of saying I don't feel too excited, but if you're desperate, Rodney Smith is the play.
Stefania, James Robinson, of course, missed last week, and now we have some clarity on Week 17 as well for the Jaguars runner.
Yeah, he's not going to play this week, and it's interesting because last Sunday we were talking about how they left the door open for him until Saturday when they ruled him out. But when you come to find out he has a high ankle sprain, was still dealing with swelling in his ankle this week, it was pretty clear that he probably wasn't ever going to make it last week. And James Robinson's such a talented player, over 1,000 rushing yards, over 300 receiving yards. What a revelation he was. He'll have a chance to get healthy. I'm actually glad for his sake, for his health, that he's not pushing to come back this year. Let him get well, and we will see him in 2021.
Yeah, what an incredible run for him, quite literally. 3rd in the NFL still in rushing. He had over 1,000 rushing yards, most scrimmage yards ever from an undrafted rookie free agent. Just an incredible story here for James Robinson. He'll look great next to Trevor Lawrence next year. More on the Jags backfield a little bit later on. But Stefania, Joe Mixon, it's been like 14 weeks since we last saw him on the field.
I feel like I could hit just a replay button for me. I mean, I don't know, Field. Do you remember when I started saying we're not going to see him again. I think it was when he got placed on injured reserve. I really felt like that was a significant step backwards, because if you recall, after he injured his foot originally, he was never placed on IR, and that's fine. You allow the player to see how he progresses. I mean, that happened with Michael Thomas of the Saints as well. But the problem, especially with these midfoot injuries, is they can be very subtle, very problematic, and if you keep testing it, just pushing it a little bit, and it's not getting better, it actually takes longer on the back end to ultimately recover from it. So once he went on injured reserve, I never felt like we'd see him again. But yet they kept dangling him out there like maybe, day to day. And this is probably the first week that we've had this early of a confirmation that he is not going to play. And this is nothing on Joe Mixon. This is really important for his long-term career that he does not push through this if it continues to be a problem. But I would keep an eye on what happens during the offseason. If this does not get better with rest, he may be a guy who's headed for surgery.
Yikes, that's no good. But the good thing for him is he got paid this past offseason, 4-year, $48 million extension. More to come on Giovanni Bernard a little bit later. In a week when we're going to have probably some unlikely players at quarterback, Stefania, will the Cardinals have their starter in Kyler Murray?
Kyler Murray confirmed it was if you saw the little session he had with reporters, it's our Josh Weinfuss who asked him about his leg, and he asked him, give Josh the business here, but he asked him like how his leg felt and if he was going to play, sort of the two question in one question, and Kyler Murray chose to answer just the first part. He said, "I'm feeling good." And everyone was like, "So are you going to play?" And it took a while, and he goes, "Oh yeah, you guys want to tweet it out?" He goes, "Go ahead, I'm playing." So he confirmed that he will indeed play and put in a full practice on top of it.
If it's confirmed on Twitter, it must be true, Stefania. We do know that the Steelers still have something at stake on Sunday. We also know they're going to be without at least one starter, that being their starting quarterback.
Yeah, I think this is smart. Look, Ben Roethlisberger had one of his best performances after he had a week where he was at home and the team did not practice because of COVID issues at the facility. And this is probably just the right time for Ben. If you've been watching him play, it just hasn't looked like himself. And I'm not talking about his arm strength. I have it on good authority that as far as his velocity and spin rate and all the metrics that you look at when you're looking at how a quarterback throws the ball, he's actually improved some post-surgery relative to pre-surgery, but his game was off. His total game was off this last week. And so I think this is smart. They rest him, and they will hope that he is ready and refocused for the next round.
Okay, we'll see. And it sounds like, by the way, the Steelers might have some fans in their first round of the playoff game. Mike, let's talk about the Steelers wide receivers, who so far this year have been pretty useful in fantasy. Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, any of them. Would you play any of them in Week 17?
I would think about a few of them. I'm, looking at my rankings here. I have Deontay Johnson 23rd, Juju 42nd, so not feeling great about him. Chase Claypool, I do not have ranked, so I would stay away from him. And I'll tell you why. I mean, that might seem pretty severe, a pretty severe downgrade with Big Ben, but think about a few things here. So the Steelers are averaging 3.0 offensive touchdowns per game this season. Okay. Last year, that's 11th in the league, by the way. Last year, they were at 1.6. That would be 30th in the NFL this season. They were lucky if they scored one touchdown a game in the second half. Remember how horrendous they were with Duck Hodges and, of course, Mason Rudolph? So they really struggled as a team last year. Dead last in fantasy points, just total fantasy points across the offense, dead last. And think about these receivers specifically. Juju Smith-Schuster, after Week 3 last season, 2 weekly finishes better than 47th. None after Week 8.
Wow.
Deontay Johnson, his average weekly wide receiver finish last season was 48th. He finished 37th or worse in 7 of his final 9 games. And James Washington, he was a full-time player. He played in all but one game. He's basically playing the Chase Claypool role. Last season he was 0 top 10s last season and only 3 top 30s. I mean, across the board, just terrible fantasy production, specifically their wide receivers as well. I just don't feel good about it. Like, you might say, okay, well, it's another year of Mason Rudolph. Maybe he's better now. The offense has been good all season. These players are playing well. Your championship's on the line. Yeah. Like, do you want to fire these guys up and take that chance? Your team's probably pretty good if you've made it this far. You probably have other wide receiver options. And, look, if you want to start Deontay, I think you should, because he'll be heavily targeted. Juju's close. Fine, I get it. Claypool's not playing enough right now. I don't think so. But I would have some serious reservations. Eric Ebron, too. I don't want any piece of him. We're going to talk about James Conner later. I don't really like him either. But if you can avoid the Steelers' offense this week, I would do that.
And this is sort of next level. But The Steelers, if they lose, the Bills automatically have the number 2 seed in the AFC. The Bills, if a win, they're also automatically the number 2 seed. But it's possible that, let's say they look up at halftime of their game against the Dolphins, and the Steelers are down, I'm just making this up, 17-6 against the Browns. Do you think Sean McDermott, who has been very coy this week, has said, hey, I'm going to keep my plans for my starters to myself, which is totally his right, by the way. Do you think that is there any thought to downgrading your Bills as a result of the uncertainty of how they will approach this game, not only leading up to it, Mike, but also during it? Or is this one of those scenarios where you say to yourself, it's already difficult enough to try to figure out how things will go when the players are actually playing, that I'm just going to throw my fate into the wind in this case and just say, I'm playing my Bills because they're my best players, and if they get pulled at halftime, so be it.
I'll tell you what, if I'm playing for a championship and I have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs as my battery, I'm not going to bench them.
Right.
I'm not going to do that. So I did hedge a little bit in the projections. I knocked the offense down to about 80%. So that might knock Josh Allen down from QB1 to QB5.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he's pretty good. So even if you scale back some of his workload, he's still pretty good. But I want to read that Marcel Louis-Jacques, who covers the team for us, covers the Bills for us here at ESPN. His tweet, he said, Sean McDermott said the Bills have a plan for Week 17's game versus the Dolphins, but we won't find out until game time. McDermott plans on keeping that info within the organization. So he didn't say they're going to play the whole game or they're not going to play at all, or they're only going to play to halftime, or they're going to scoreboard watch. So I think you have to at least consider that when making lineup decisions, right? If John Brown comes back, maybe you don't feel as great about using him. Maybe you stay away from Cole Beasley, who we don't even know if he's going to play, right? Had the injury last week. But I think Dawson Knox, not a tight end streaming option. But at the top, Allen, I think Allen and Diggs must start. Otherwise, I'd be probably trying to stay away there.
I know that this is obvious, but I just want to say this. This is why Week 17 is so hard to do fantasy in, because we're talking about whether or not you look at Steelers' strategy based on what the Bills would do based on their playoff picture, and then you try to project that forward with a backup quarterback, and it's how do you put all those things together as a factor and be able to say, I can make any decisions with any sort of certainty going forward? End your weeks in Week 16. End your seasons in Week 16. Week 17 is so difficult from that perspective. But we've already talked about 2 really awesome NFL Nation reporters, and I just wanted to say, we've had so many great people over the course of this season that have helped our show, from our own company with Lindsay and Jock and everybody. So many amazing NFL Nation reporters. Make sure that you follow them all on Twitter, because we get so much information from them. You definitely need to follow them as well.
Well
Ben
said.
Baby, by the way.
Ben Baby is amazing.
who
Joe
changed
Mixon account.
his name of his account
so
to
good.
answer Joe Mixon questions because he was getting hit up by so many who play fantasy football. And I really appreciate that they have really made it a focus, all of our Nation reporters, to carve out nuggets and bits of information that actually help us with fantasy decision making.
We are very fortunate to have the best
Absolutely.
of the best as part of the ESPN NFL Nation team, and they churn out content all throughout the year. Support them during the offseason. Stefania, Jared Goff had that thumb surgery recently. That means he is out?
Well, he's out for this week.
Okay.
And this was, I believe, the right decision. He had a fractured dislocation in his thumb. I know he was concerned about, maybe he could try and play through it. But the problem is when you have an unstable situation where if you have a fracture and let's say you get hit in the hand again, same mechanism, he hits his thumb against a helmet and now you displace it, you create maybe a greater injury than what you had originally, then you're maybe compromising your health and your career. And so why not, if it's a simple fix, get it fixed and then, miss this week. Obviously, they will be without him as they hope to make it to the playoffs, but he could potentially be back next week if he can grip and throw a football. He may be able to return to practice by middle of next week.
He's not the only Ram out. Is also not just Darrell Henderson, but also Cooper Kupp now out as well, Stefania, this week.
Yeah, on the reserve COVID-19 list, and he's already been declared absent for this week. So you've got Cam Akers, a huge question mark. I think it's really questionable if he'll play with a high ankle sprain. You've got Darrell Henderson already out and on IR, and now Cooper Kupp on the reserve COVID-19 list.
Mike, that leaves potentially Malcolm Brown as a starter, as Stefania mentioned. Cam Akers has a chance, maybe not a great chance, but Sean McVay said, don't bet against this kid playing on Sunday. Robert Woods, Malcolm Brown, is there anybody else on this Rams offense you would trust playing this weekend? Would you even trust Robert Woods?
Woods, I think you have to. It's kind of like what I was saying earlier with Stephon Diggs, like, he's going to see a ton of volume, especially with Cooper Kupp out, right? He should see 25, 30% of the target. So I'd have a hard time benching him. I mean, if you're really stacked at wide receiver, you can certainly consider it. But I think you start either Akers or Brown, depending on what happens there. You start Woods. Otherwise, you'd have to be in a deep league. Josh Reynolds could see 10 targets. It's very possible. Van Jefferson should be the third wide receiver. Tyler Higbee a tight end. I mean, you have to be getting pretty deep to trust those guys, but they're DFS options at the very least.
Stefania, Matthew Stafford for the Lions, as we know, very tough as they come, but will he be available in Week 17?
He will not be available. Look, this is an ankle injury, and it doesn't seem that it would really threaten him more than the rib cartilage injury, for example, or the thumb injury that he's already played through. But you put all three together, you've got your star quarterback, and it really becomes a case of protecting him, just like they did last year when he had multiple back fractures and they shut him down to protect him. Kenny Golladay also on that team, who we haven't seen since week 8. And I would say this, if you want to read another Nation reporter, Mike Rothstein, I thought put a nice piece together on Matthew Stafford and all the reasons that Matthew Stafford did not need to play because he's already done so much for the organization and for the fans.
I have an idea, and I love Matthew Stafford with my whole heart. I love that guy. I hope he gets the best out of him. So Kenny Golladay kind of reminds me of something, Daniel. Do you want to play a game with me, Daniel?
I'd love to play a game with you, yeah.
Right here. I don't know if we
Let's
can
do
or
it.
not. You know the Spider-Man meme?
Yes.
So do you want to be Joe Mixon or Kenny Golladay?
Let me be Kenny Golladay.
Okay.
Let me be Kenny.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Point. I'm Joe Mixon. Hold on. Wait.
Oh.
You.
There it is.
You.
Hey, why? I don't understand why there's a picture of the same guy up there.
Wow. Mike, thank you for selling that for us. For
Yeah.
everyone that,
Yeah.
that was.
If Mike didn't
Do what I
do
can.
that,
You tried. It's the same thing, right?
No.
Like
It
Kenny
is the same
Golladay
thing.
and Joe Mixon. It's like
was-
out early, and it's like
It's funny you say that because I was thinking earlier about Mixon. I'm like, man, that's going to be a tough guy to rank next year. And then Golladay, I'm like, man, that's going to be a tough guy to rank
Yeah.
next year. The same thing was going through my head. So it's funny you say that, but we're starting
All
to
right,
think
let's
ahead,
move
right? I'm
off
already
that
starting to
joke.
think next year's drafts, and I'm already like, oh my
Mike,
goodness.
can we just get the 2021
No, we
first?
can't.
One more, Stefania. You told us about this earlier in the week, but a reminder on Brandon Aiyuk for the 49ers.
Yeah, Brandon Aiyuk's season is over. Yet another high ankle sprain, which there have been so many in the league. And the 49ers, honestly, I don't know what else can happen. I'm surprised they could field a team. Oh, I do know what else can happen because they signed Robbie Gould to a contract extension. And within the same day that news was announced, he went on the reserve COVID-19 list. So there you go.
Yeah.
2020 for the 49ers in a nutshell.
Yeah, that right there really is 2020 in a nutshell for the San Francisco 49ers. We've got so much coming up on the show in terms of playoff scenarios, who needs to play and who doesn't. We'll tell you all about that. But first, do you own or rent your home? Sure you do. And I bet it can be hard work. But you know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
So listen, you're hanging out with some friends, putting back a few drinks, right? A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride, but, I mean, come on, you live nearby. You can make it home, right? It's no big deal. What are the odds you're going to get pulled over anyways? And even so, what's the worst that could happen, right? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill somebody. Everyone knows the risks of drunk driving. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, please think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over.
All right, taking a look at some of the players and the teams that need it and don't need it. So I'm going to try to give you a little bit of the context surrounding Week 17 for a variety of teams. I'm not going to go through every single scenario. Some of them make it really easy on us, like the Chiefs, who need to do nothing on Sunday. They are already locked into the AFC's number 1 seed, home field advantage, a first-round bye, the only first-round bye in the AFC this year. As we know, the Chiefs are the only team in the NFL that has locked up their seed for the playoffs going into Week 17. ESPN Stats and Information notes that there are 35 different possible wild card round matchups. 35 possible. So a lot at stake here in Week 17. So the Chiefs are going to bench Patrick. They're benching him. Apparently, Chad Henne's better than Patrick Mahomes. I don't know when this happened, but apparently,
Look, you got to take a look at Chad Henne.
ESPN Radio, breaking news.
The Chiefs arresting Patrick.
Okay,
Mahomes.
got
You got
it.
to get a chance to take a look at Chad Henne, right? Just like a couple years ago, they arrested Alex Smith, and they benched Alex Smith and took a look at Patty Mahomes. You gotta bench him and take a look at Chad Henne. See what this kid got. Why missing zone?
Let's take a look at some of the players that are ranked outside the top 12, for example, that could be a reasonable option to replace Patrick Mahomes. Is there a name that comes to mind for you, Mike?
Yeah, Derek Carr does. He's a QB 13 on my board. He has at least 316 passing yards in his past 3 full games. Obviously, we're not counting the one in prime time where he got injured early on. We're not going to count that against him. 22-plus fantasy points in 4 of his past 5 full games. And look, back in the first meeting against Denver, he struggled. And actually, I guess we should mention that all of these games are divisional games this week. So we have some background, or I guess we have a first matchup between these teams this season that we could refer to throughout the show. Again, he struggled in that game, but this is a different Denver defense. They're missing a lot of pieces. They're overwhelmed with injuries in the secondary. In fact, they're allowing the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the past month, 17 or more allowed to quarterbacks in 13 of 15 games. So they've already allowed a very high floor. They're allowing a high ceiling to quarterbacks lately as well. And we know that the Raiders offense has scored a pretty decent amount of points, right around 3 per game with a healthy Carr this season. So I think, again, if you're in desperation, you're looking for an option, a guy who could have a big week that's available in a lot of leagues, Derek Carr's your guy.
I want to look at someone on the other side field if I could throw you a name real quick.
Sure.
Because I also have Derek Carr listed because he's definitely the one that I feel most comfortable with. But is Drew Brees an option for you this week? Understanding last week his numbers look really bad, taking on the Panthers this week. But they scored 7 rushing touchdowns last week. So, like, when you look at that 8.1 points that he got last week, that's so skewed because of that outrageous week that Alvin Kamara had. Is he somebody that, outside of that top 12, is like, all right, at least in this game against the Panthers, he's at least worth a consideration?
I was finally starting to get over last week.
Sorry, I did not mean to bring it up. Sorry.
2 separate occasions. Thank you, Daniel. Very cheery of you. 2021's off to a smashed start, even though it hasn't actually begun yet. I would say yes. I would also say I don't know if he's available in that many leagues. Is he? Like Drew Brees, I just don't know if he's available in your league to pick up.
He is available in 48% of leagues.
Okay, maybe so.
Wow.
Yeah, I prefer Carr. I think he's.
I do too.
Drew Brees, though.
I do too.
He's pretty good. You do worry about him losing touchdowns, not only to Alvin Kamara, but also to Taysom Hill, who will come in and run it in or throw it in or do a variety of things. And that's always kind of a limiting factor with Brees, especially because quarterback's so deep with so many teams scoring, a lot of touchdowns this season. So I don't feel great about him. I think I probably have him like 18th or 20th in my ranks this week.
So quarterback is super deep, but this week everybody past 12 just doesn't feel good to me. Like it's a very easy cutoff to say, like I don't feel good about any of these guys after that point.
Well, you don't feel good about Phillip Rivers against the Jags?
Well, you know what, Stefania, that's a great one.
That would be my suggestion. I'm going to throw that in there. Now, I do think that I worry about Indy losing Anthony Costanzo because of ankle surgery, but they obviously proved that they could run their offense last week and do a pretty good job, and they're playing for something. So T.Y. Hilton's looking great. I think him and Rivers have developed a connection, so I think Rivers is a reasonable play this week.
One day.
I was just going to add, the Colts are playing a lot better offensively than they were in week 1 when they lost to the Jags. Remember that shocking upset? So playing a lot better, to Stefania's point.
They certainly are. How about Tyreek Hill? So we don't know, at least as far as I have not heard, or as far as I have heard, Tyreek Hill has not been definitively ruled out for Week 17. Andy Reid at one point said key starters will not play. The only one he has identified so far is Patrick Mahomes, but logic suggests that Tyreek Hill, if he does play on Sunday, will be very limited. Is there a favorite sort of streaming wide receiver to make up a term for Week 17 that you like, Mike?
Yeah, a guy that's been heavily targeted for a while now and is coming off one of his best games of the season, really one of his career best games. Michael Gallup, I have him wide receiver 27 on my board against the Giants. And, I mean, I tweeted a kind of a thread about what happened to the Eagles' defense last week. They had Darius Slay on one side, shadowing Amari Cooper at the beginning. And then on the other side, you have Michael Jackhead, who is an undrafted player who was, the Cowboys went in and said, look, we're just going to throw at this guy every time. And they pretty much did. They identified man coverage when the Eagles love running man one. When their man coverage, they went after him. And then obviously Gallup had a great start to the game, was just shredding the Eagles. So then with the Eagles, it was like, you know what? We're going to put Slay on Gallup now. What did they do? Then Cooper had, 100 yards in the second half. They just started throwing that jacket again. So this week, that's notable because this week it's a similar situation, right? We expect James Bradbury to shadow Amari Cooper. That puts Gallup on the other side against Isaac Yiadom. So I think that's a good situation for him. If you look at the Cowboys' targets in their past 5 games, Gallup has 38, CeeDee Lamb has 31, Cooper has 30. The Cowboys are scoring points again. They're like the Dak Prescott Cowboys, 4 touchdowns offensively in back-to-back games. They've been terrific. Gallup only had 4 targets in the first meeting with the Giants. Earlier in the season, he wasn't really getting the targets. Still had 73 yards in that game. That was way back in week 5. I think that he's set up for a pretty nice week. So, again, might be out there in a bunch of leagues. Maybe he's on your bench. He's an option.
Daniel, any other wide receiver names you want to throw into the hat?
I just like Jamison Crowder. I think the last couple of weeks he's really come on. 17 targets over the last 2 weeks. It's like this team forgot that he existed, and understanding the quarterback play, and that team has obviously struggled. But these last 2 weeks I've really liked him. He's available in about 30% of leagues. But for someone that I have seen it on the field, I have seen that production. If I have to trust somebody that I don't normally want to start in my fantasy lineup, I feel pretty good with Jamison Crowder, knowing that I know that talent. I love that target share. And this week, he's somebody I think you could plug in if you really needed to.
Yeah, throws a gorgeous deep ball
yes,
as well,
he does.
as we saw this past week. Let's get to the tight ends. Again, don't know for sure that Travis Kelce is sitting out on Sunday. It would just stand to reason that Kelce would be out on Sunday. Mike, you got a name that you like most specifically to fill in for Travis Kelce?
I do. And Kelce, by the way, he doesn't need to break any more records, right? He already cleared them all up, right? Doesn't he have all the records now?
It's not a record, but I will say if he has 12 receiving touchdowns this year, it increases his base salary next year by $500,000, which is kind of
How many does he have right now?
11.
Ooh. So maybe he comes in, catches a touchdown. Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, if he's active, he'd be hard to bench. But if you need someone else, if you want to fill in with another guy that's probably out there in a bunch of leagues or, again, on benches, Irv Smith. Going up against Daniel's Detroit Lions. I have him 16th on my board. Look, coming off a career-high 9 targets and 6 catches last week. He had 2 touchdowns last week. He had 2 touchdowns in the Week 9 game against the Lions. And, I didn't even realize this. This surprised me. He's been active for 8 games since Week 5. He's tight end 4 those weeks.
Wow.
Top 5 fantasy tight end when he's been active his past 8 games. No Kyle Rudolph again. He's not playing. The Lions have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends over the past month. We know they're struggling horribly defensively. So Irv Smith, I think, is a fine streaming option.
Daniel?
Nope.
But you just
I agree. What do you want? I don't want to talk about Irv Smith because he's playing my team. I think that he's probably going to score a handful of points. I don't need to rub the salt in the wound anymore. It's my wound to begin with. So.
Okay. Just a reminder that, so as I mentioned, there are 35 different playoff possibilities. One team has already clinched its spot. That's the Chiefs, number 1 overall. That means every other team going into this weekend has something to play for. I'm not going to rip through every single playoff scenario. I will tell you this. 8 teams have a win and you are in scenario, which means they will be highly motivated to both play their players and play well. The Titans, the Dolphins, the Ravens, the Browns, the Washington football team, the Rams, the Bears, and the Cardinals. All 8 of those teams. If you have players on those teams, don't worry about them. 3 others, the Giants, the Cowboys, and also the Colts, have a win plus some help scenario, and they're in. Don't worry about them. There are only a few teams that you need to kind of be a little bit mindful of. We talked about the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. The other one that's sort of a little bit interesting is the Bucks, but it seems like Bruce Arians not only wants to get Mike Evans over 1,000 receiving yards because he would become the first player to ever reach 1,000 receiving yards in the first 7 seasons of his career, but they also seem to think that A, 11 wins is more significant than 10 wins, and B, it guarantees them the 5th seed. And you know what that means? That means you're going to Washington or Dallas or New York for the first round of the playoffs, as opposed to likely going to Seattle for the playoffs. I don't know. I think the only further trip in the league that you could make is Miami to Seattle, other than Tampa Bay to Seattle. So motivation for basically everybody.
And the Bills, too. And the Bills, would be
yes,
the other
and the Bills, yeah, as we discussed. The Bills are sort of like keep an eye on them. And then, so just keep an eye on the Bills, keep an eye on the Chiefs, keep an eye on the Bucks. But really the Chiefs are the other ones that you can concretely say we're gonna have to make other plans. So Mike mentioned that every game this weekend is a rematch, as the NFL, 5 or 6 years ago, reconfigured their schedule, one of the reconfigurations was that every Week 17 game was going to be a division game. Opened up the possibility of those great flex options. So let's look at some players that went crazy in their first game of the season against the opponent they're facing this upcoming week, and whether Mike and us think that they have a chance to repeat their previous success. We start with Hollywood Brown, Mike, who has kind of come on of late. He has been much better over the past 5 weeks than he was during the first 11 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I'll say so. He's been much better. He's a touchdown in 4 of his past 6 games. So he's been rolling as of late. He has 13 or more fantasy points in 5 straight. He's wide receiver 16 in fantasy during that span. The concern is he's averaging 6 targets per game this season. That is not really going to cut it over the long term. In fact, even during this recent span, when he's done well, it's been very touchdown dependent. He's only averaging 6.6 targets per game. I'm worried that he could disappear again. The Bengals are better defensively than probably you think, right? They're a team that doesn't have many wins. They lost Joe Burrow, but the defense has quietly done a pretty nice job this season, as we kind of expected. They added some nice pieces during the offseason. I don't have a problem using him as a wide receiver 3. He's 30th on my board, but I'm nervous that he could just have another one of those 2-catch 19-yard games with no touchdowns, and he crushes you. So, you know what you're dealing with. It's certainly a boom-bust sort of player.
How about CeeDee Lamb for the Cowboys? The last time they played the Giants, way back in Week 5, had 8 catches for 124 yards. He was a top 15 wide receiver in that matchup.
I'm 38th, so flex option in deeper leagues. 20-plus fantasy points in his past 2 games. Again, the Cowboys' offense, as mentioned earlier, has scored 4 touchdowns in both of those games, so they are playing well right now. But he did need a rushing and a return touchdown in those games in order to get to the 20-plus points. So keep that in mind. Those aren't really touchdowns you're going to be able to count on. He does only have 12 targets during those past 2 games, which is why, again, I'm kind of lower on him despite the recent surge in production. And also, the Giants' 7th most fantasy points to the slot over the past 2 months and the past month. They've kind of struggled finding a guy they like in the slot. Julian Love, who is a safety, has worked the slot for them as of late. So there are things to like, things to not like. If you're looking for a lottery ticket, he's an option, but I don't feel like he is the high floor we were hoping for with him, and certainly the one we saw with Dak earlier this season.
Antonio Brown was a top 10 wide receiver, I believe, for the only time this year when he last played the Falcons, all 10 days ago, and will be 2 weeks ago from the time they rematch on Sunday. You confident in him again against the Falcons?
Yeah, again, same kind of conversation here, right? I have all these guys ranked between 30 and 38. He's 32nd on my board. The concern with Brown, of course, is target volume. His targets over his past 4 games, 3, 5, 7, and 6, right? So that's not, you'd like to see more for a guy you have in your starting lineup. But he's playing the Falcons. Yeah, not so hot stopping wide receivers this season. The defense has played better lately, but still, they've allowed 40-plus fantasy points to wide receivers in 10 of 15 games. And that wasn't all early season. That includes 3 of their past 4 games. They're top 6 in fantasy points allowed overall and to the perimeter this season. And over the past month, Brown usually lines up on the outside. So a lot of reasons to think he could have another big game, but also some reservations there with the target volume. It all works out to a borderline top 30 play.
Just an FYI, the Falcons have closed their facility today as well, as they found out of 1 positive COVID test. No impact on the game on Sunday as of yet. You'd think the NFL will be able to play that game, but just worth putting on your radar. You mentioned earlier that you're basically fading all Steelers, and perhaps none more so than James Conner.
Yeah, 36, that running back for me. Had the big game in the first, meaning 20 carries, 101 yards, and a touchdown. But look, he's only averaging 10 carries per game over his past 5 games. He had 5 targets last week. It was the first time he was above 3 since week 7. So he's not even getting that target volume to make us feel good about that. And there's no Big Ben, all right? I talked about this earlier. Their touchdowns per game last season was basically cut in half from what we're seeing this season. It's not enough. The Browns have allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to running backs this season. So really a lot of reasons to be concerned here with James Conner. And, if they're going to rest Big Ben, maybe Conner doesn't play as much. In fact, I injected some Anthony McFarland into the projections. I think maybe he's active this week and gets some run for the rookie. Maybe they save up Conner a little bit for the playoffs. There's plenty of reasons to be worried about Conner this week. I would not feel great starting him.
Daniel, you a little more confident in James Conner?
I mean, I'm a little bit more confident from the idea that if I feel like they want to if they get into the red zone or with inside the 5, like, do I think that he's a chance to score a touchdown? Yeah. And when I'm looking at a lot of these running backs that I have left, like, there's just not a ton of confidence, right? I'm looking at guys that I feel like could have positions to score, especially in that, mid-20 range. Once you get in the mid-20s of running backs, it's like, who do I think has the best chance to score and or have, that workload? So I don't love James Conner, but I do feel like I'm not quite as low as Mike as running back 36.
I don't know. I think you should put him in your DFS cash lineup head-to-head against me this week.
Ooh, that sounds like the
I'll tell you
gauntlet
what.
has just been laid down.
Check out CSS DFS later on this week. Mike and I have had a long season. We are tied 8-8 in our head-to-head matchups. So this week 17 game is going to be a big one.
Big one.
For those that don't know, if Daniel loses, he has to shave his beard. If Mike loses, he has to smash his computer over his knee.
Yes.
Which, if you know either of those,
That
two
would break,
people-
and then we'd have an injury situation.
That
Have
would-
you ever felt that computer? It's
computer
like
is so big.
45
For all the
pounds.
people watching that rely on our projections, no one likes that. Nobody wins. If
I'm
we
just
do that.
saying,
Nobody
those are
wins.
two things that are very valuable. They're sort
Yes.
of like, those are
Yes.
your brands,
That's
right?
true.
That's true.
Justin Herbert,
accurate.
the last time he played against the Chiefs, he found out who's going to be the starter 6 minutes before the game kicked off. It was week 2. He had a really nice showing, 311 passing yards, a touchdown, interception, plus a rushing touchdown. He was only quarterback 13 on the week, but he scored 22.2 fantasy points. Now with the Chiefs potentially resting defensive starters, Mike, crank him up.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have him QB7 this week, and that's despite the fact that he has one weekly finish better than 14th during his past 5 games. Remember, he ripped off 6 straight top
awesome.
10s, and he has really fallen off as of late. It's been it hasn't made a ton of sense, but again, he's playing really against the backup defense for the they're going to rest their star guys. I'm sure guys will rest throughout that game as well. He's set up for a big game here. We know they like to throw the football, and at times this season they've scored a lot of points. So the Chiefs were already, we think about them as dominant against wide receivers. They've been since the beginning of last season, but they're only mid-pack against quarterbacks this season, and that was with their starters healthy most of the season. That won't be the case this season with guys resting. So Herbert, I think you feel good about him as a QB1.
Let's take a look at some players and the total points they've scored over the past 4 weeks. All these players have been good and a little bit faster pace here. Are you buying that this continues into week 17? Ryan Tannehill, you have to love the matchup against the Houston Texans.
Wagon!
There it is. I'm on the Tana wagon.
Yes.
Well, I guess I'm close to the Tana wagon. I'm
Yeah.
QB 11 on my board, right? So borderline starter. We're all in that 10 to 11.
You're walking
range.
beside the Tana wagon with your hand on it as it's going down the trail.
And
What do you
as
call
are
it
you.
when
You're on the
someone
other
rides?
side.
I
You're
understand.
QB 11 too. So we each have a hand on the wagon,
Well,
but
yeah.
we're not in the wagon.
Exactly.
I guess it really depends on your options. Certainly a good fill-in for Mahomes, right? If you have Mahomes and you want to fire him up, he's playing against Houston. Tannehill's up to QB7 this season, and that first meeting. To Fields' point, 29 fantasy points, a ton of yards, ton of touchdowns. He has 15-plus fantasy points and multiple touchdowns in 13 of 15 games this season, including 6 straight. Talk about a floor. That's a tremendous fantasy floor for sure. Just knowing you're getting 15 or more points with upside for more for sure. Also, really quick note on the Houston defense, 70% completion percentage allowed this season. That is highest in the NFL. They're 3rd in yards per attempt allowed, top 7 in pass yards and touchdowns allowed. Across the board, a defense really struggling against that spot. So, yeah, I'm fine with Tannehill.
Yeah, by the way, other side of that game, Deshaun Watson wasn't even on the Texans' Wednesday injury report. He got hurt. He was in pain, I should say, late in that game this past Sunday against the Bengals, but he got up under his own power eventually. He is seemingly all good. J.D. McKissick has been running back 5 over the past 4 weeks, Mike, and he just keeps catching passes and more passes.
He does, and it's led to fantasy production, right? Speaking of high floors, 10 or more fantasy points in 10 of his past 12 games. He's up to, again, speaking of who would have thought, RB15 this season.
Yeah.
J.D. McKissick is RB15 in PPR. Unbelievable. 10 or more targets and 8+ catches in 3 of his past 4. I'm worried a little bit about the fact that he started to drop off a little bit, his usage with Antonio Gibson peaking around Thanksgiving, that span there. Gibson was limited a bit last week. We expect him to be more of a full go this week. He had a decent game against the Eagles back in week 1 in his NFL debut, even being limited in that one. So something to keep in mind there. Eagles also very good against receiving running backs, bottom 10 in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and only 1 touchdown to running backs out of the backfield. So there's some reasons for some concern. That's why he's RB22 for me. But again, in PPR, he's a fine RB2 or flex option.
Jeff Wilson has been great for the 49ers recently, Mike, and no reason to believe that won't be the case again on Sunday. He is the go-to man in their backfield.
Yeah, let's put some numbers on his usage last week because I mean, how often can we say, "Whoa, that guy was the feature back, the workhorse back in a Kyle Shanahan offense"? It's not often.
frequent. Yeah.
He loves to use 2 or 3 backs, sometimes 4 backs. Last week, Jeff Wilson, 38 of a possible 55 snaps, handled 22 of the 25 carries by their running backs. Again, unheard of with the Shanahan offense. Had 183 rushing yards. Only had 1 target, but he did have 4+ the previous 3 games, so we expect more of that in this game against Seattle. Has a touchdown in 3 straight games. He's the goal line back there. And look, the Seahawks are low in running back touches and yards touches faced, yards allowed, but they have allowed 16 touchdowns. That is 8th most of 2 running backs among defenses this season. So Wilson's 9th on my board. He's an RB1, I think.
T.Y. Hilton is kind of like Matthew Berry. He may be old, but he is effective. He has been wide receiver 6 over the past. Was that too mean?
I don't know. I think it was too. I don't think Matthew's that effective, in all honesty. So
it's funny though. With Hilton's 31 or something. He's younger than both of us. Or
yeah,
old,
crazy,
old wide receiver. He's also wide receiver 6 over the past 4 weeks, Mike. And there is no better matchup. Every Sunday I do the wide receiver cornerback matchup segment with Mike on Fantasy Football Now, and like 70% of the time we highlight the Jaguars cornerbacks and how bad they are.
You can't help it, right? I mean, do you want the best
right.
matchups or not? Like the Jags have just struggled, injuries, execution. It's been rough. To your point, wide receiver 8 since week 12, top 5 in yards per target and touchdowns during that span. It's been efficiency, and it's been an uptick in volume as well for him. 60+ receiving yards in 5 straight, 6+ targets in 4 straight games to the point with the volume. And again, let's put numbers on those Jags, right? Top 10 in fantasy points allowed overall to the perimeter, 2 left perimeter receivers, 2 right perimeter receivers over the past 2 months. They lost Sidney Jones-Dyer last week too. I mean, it's just injuries, it's efficiency, it's everything. They have a really hard time stopping this position. Hilton's playing well. He's wide receiver 21 on my board.
As a result of no Matthew Stafford, are you in or out on Marvin Jones?
I'm out. I'm sure I'm lower than you guys by a few spots, but I think we all agree he's probably more of a borderline wide receiver 3, I guess, more of a flex option. But without Stafford, I don't feel great. In fact, Matthew Stafford went out early last week. Marvin Jones had 3 catches for 19 yards in that game. Now, before that, he had 8+ targets in 4 straight games. But again, there's no Stafford for this game. The Vikings are actually playing better against wide receivers as of late. They've allowed the 8th most fantasy points, a very high touchdown total in yards per target, but they have been a little bit better as of late. Overall, I'd say it's a good matchup, but without Stafford, I just don't feel super great about Marvin Jones. There's definitely a chance that he has a dud. So, again, flex at best.
All right, now let's go through some players that had awesome weeks last week. The question is whether they can repeat that performance, Mike. And the first one is A.J. Dillon. He played a ton of snaps last week, in part because Jamal Williams was out. Stefania, do we think Jamal Williams will return this week for the Packers?
Well, he's been out there practice doing a little bit on Wednesday, still listed as limited because of that quad injury. So, we shall see.
Okay, we shall see. And you would think that if he doesn't play, there's a good chance that A.J. Dillon will play a lot. But, Mike, what was interesting was that it wasn't like the Packers had nothing to play for last week, and he was playing more than Aaron Jones by a lot.
Yeah, it was interesting. They've done that with Jones a lot. Like you've seen Matthew tweeting quite a bit the free Aaron Jones hashtag just in the middle of games randomly because you see a lot of Jamal Williams or you see A.J. Dillon or at times you saw Tyler Ervin mixed into the rotation there. Right. But look, Dillon, I think his appeal depends on Jamal Williams, right? If Jamal does happen to play, then we don't like him. If Williams is out right now, I have it projected with Williams playing, then Dillon is suddenly in the maybe the non-PPR flex conversation. I don't feel great about him in PPR. A lot of volume last week for sure. It is a tougher matchup. The Bears have allowed the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs despite the 7th most carries faced against running backs. They've only allowed 10 touchdowns to that position as well, 4th fewest in the NFL. So long shot for a touchdown. You will probably see more Aaron Jones. Over time he's going to be the 1A in that backfield. And he doesn't see many targets as well. So I just think there's a really low floor with A.J. Dillon. That's what makes me nervous here.
Last week, we saw a bunch of Samaje Perine. Late in the game for the Bengals, he actually ran well. He found the end zone. People are wondering, does that mean that Gio Bernard no longer is a player I can trust this week, Mike?
I don't think so. He had a good game, too.
He did.
Right? He was terrific. In fact, 41 carries over the past 2 games for Gio Bernard. We're not used to seeing such a massive carry volume for Gio Bernard. So I have him 27th on my board this week. Again, a flex option, borderline RB2 in 12-team leagues. He had 7 targets last week. He only had 9 his previous 4 games total, so we don't want to get too carried away with that. But again, he is getting that carry volume. 20+ fantasy points over the past 2 weeks, but he had 10 or fewer in 5 straight before that. And I think that's notable because About 2 weeks ago, I said, I think it was on the DFS podcast, we were talking about him, and I was high on him. He had like 5 straight bad games, and I was like, well, did you see the schedule? It was just tough game, really tough slate. Then he had a couple easy games lined up. It was like, all right, I think with the volume he's getting, he'll bounce back, and he did. But again, he's going back to the Ravens this week, right? He's going back against a really tough defense. They've been great against running backs. They had 2 major duds. It was the Browns game and the Patriots game. Otherwise, they've been terrific. They've only allowed 7 rushing touchdowns this season. That's 3rd fewest. And actually, Bengals running backs in the first meeting, 98 yards, 0 touchdowns, only 17 fantasy points. It was not a very good showing. They are mixing in P. Ryan, to your point. So, again, I don't want to get carried away with this past couple of weeks. It's a much tougher matchup. I think he's a flex.
T. Higgins, also for the Bengals, it's been such a good year for rookie wide receivers, Mike, but the fact that this guy might have 1,000 yards with all the quarterback turbulence and Joe Burrow's injury would be such a great accomplishment.
No doubt. He has been awesome. And again, speaking of next season, like a guy we're going to be super excited to see what he can do and make that leap in his second season with a healthy Joe Burrow. It's going to be awesome to watch that. He should really be their number one, certainly their number one on the perimeter next season. But again, a tough matchup against the Ravens. And look, he's been 5 games without Joe Burrow. He's wide receiver 28. Okay, that's not too bad. That makes him a borderline wide receiver 3. But he had the big game last week. Before that, under 57 yards in 5 straight games and 1 touchdown during that span. So, he kind of peaked last week in the post-Burrow era. Before that, he was kind of struggling. He does have 8 or more targets in 3 of 4 games, so you don't have to completely write him off. But I have him wide receiver 34 for a reason. By the way, only 62 yards on 4 catches in the first meeting with the Ravens. One thing to keep in mind, though, on here, and I wrote about this in wide receiver cornerback matchups, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith, they've been out the past couple of weeks, and the Ravens' defense against the pass has plummeted. They've allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to the perimeter over the past month. So keep an eye on that. If those 2 guys are out, you feel better about Higgins. If they are back, you don't feel as good.
Also, Tyler Boyd was out last week because of a concussion. Back in practice on Wednesday, limited. Don't know yet if he'll be cleared to return this week.
Okay, we could see more Tyler Boyd, or we could see Tyler Boyd, period, in Week 17. More than a minute ago, Daniel called the shot on Jamison Crowder, who had a great game this past week. Mike, you willing to buy in one more time against the Patriots?
I am. Again, borderline wide receiver 2 in 12-teamers here. I have him 26 on my board. He is the number 11 scoring fantasy wide receiver in 7 games with Sam Darnold, almost a 30% target share. The volume's been there. The production has been there. 8+ targets in 3 of his past 4 games. The volume has bounced back for him. Didn't do much in that Week 9 game against the Patriots, but that was the point in the season where he kind of disappeared for a while, right? He had that month where he was just not doing anything. He's kind of bounced back in a big way. It is a tough matchup against New England. They've been very good in pretty much every category against wide receivers this season. That's with an unhealthy Stephon Gilmore for most of the year. I would say it's kind of a neutral matchup against Jonathan Jones in the slot. That's kind of been I don't want to say a weak spot because their pass defense is really good, but that's an area the teams have exploited at times. So I think Crowder is, again, a fine wide receiver 3.
Part of the beauty of Week 17 is the bizarro world that often pops up, right? You've got out-of-nowhere performances. This year, it's a little bit different because, as we noted, only one team truly has nothing to play for in the playoff picture. That's the Kansas City Chiefs, who are locked into the AFC's number 1 seed. Let's go through some quarterbacks who could be the Matt Flynn, if you will, in Week 17, who all the way back in 2011.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what did he that was so long ago. What did Matt Flynn do?
You want to earmuff it for a second?
No, because I remember this game.
You're a Lions fan. He had 6 passing touchdowns, six passing touchdowns and 480 passing yards against the Lions. He parlayed that into a 3-year contract with the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah.
And never started the game. What was his name? What's the
great
guy
agent?
Yeah.
Really great agent for Matt Flynn in that time.
But what's the name of the guy that they picked?
Ralph Wilson.
Ralph Wilson. That's
Ralph,
right.
yes.
Right,
Ralph Russ?
No, it's
Russell
Gage.
Russell Gage, yeah.
Yeah.
Matt Flynn, who got Russell Wilson his first year in Seattle. Do you have a guy that you're like, all right, he could go secretly hand this weekend, and you're into it?
Well, look, Sean McVay's awesome, right?
Yeah.
I mean, dude, look what he did with Jared Goff. Could he do it with John Walford? Could he do it? I mean, we're talking about a guy who led the AAF in touchdown passes.
Yeah, he
right?
did.
Remember the Alliance Football League? He was second in QB rating. Like, he did good. I mean, again, we're not talking about the NFL, but he did good in the AAF. He showed something there. And also, how about the pedigree? Do you know the backstory on him?
Of course I do.
His uncle, Will, was a first-round NFL pick. He was a first-round draft pick. He was an offensive tackle. He made the Pro Bowl 3 times, so little pedigree there.
He was once replaced by Kendall Hinton at Wake Forest as the quarterback. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And of course, recently the Broncos practice squad wide receiver.
You guys know so much dumb stuff that nobody else cares about. I just want you to know that.
I knew this. I definitely didn't find this on Wikipedia. Definitely knew this. But look, and also, just one more thing, and we're kind of having fun with this, but he did have 222 carries and 16 touchdowns in his last 2 seasons.
Yeah,
he
he's
can
athletic.
run the ball a little bit. So maybe he comes out of nowhere, runs for 60 yards and a touchdown, you know?
Yeah, the other, and it's like a little bit more obvious, is Cam, only because Cam, as a runner, like he could still rush for 80 yards, 2 touchdowns, throw 1, and throw for 125 yards, right?
Cam Newton is #1 in OTD this year.
I saw that.
Unheard of.
Yeah, so Cam would be the only other one that has a chance for like 25 fantasy points. Now, he might get you 5, but he might get you 25 as well. Running backs, remember the time rookie Pierre Thomas, all the way back in 2007, had 12 catches, 226 total yards, and a touchdown. Is there a running back that you like this week, Mike?
Yeah, Dare Ogunbowale.
Ogunbowale.
Oh, okay. Did I say that right?
Yeah, close enough.
Ogunbowale. Yeah. So I have him 23rd on my board against the Colts this week. He was, last week played 38 of 54 snaps in that game in place of James Robinson, who, of course, is out again. He had 14 carries and 5 targets, 78 yards in that game against a pretty good Bears defense. Now, the Colts are pretty good as well, but they have allowed 14 touchdowns. It's 11th most. Maybe he gets into the end zone. The volume should be there. He's risky, obviously. You know, he's a backup, really probably more of a third-string running back, and they could look at more Divino Zigbo in this game. Craig Reynolds, too, got some run for them last week. Shout out Kutztown University. That was his first NFL touch last week. He went to the same college as I did, so that was pretty cool. Andre Reed's college as well.
Talked to Andre a couple of days ago.
You did?
Yeah.
Cool.
We talked about Kutztown. Not really.
No, you talked about
we
the
thought
Bills,
about it,
I bet.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bills. Yeah.
Anyway, I think he's, if you need a Hail Mary, a running back, or in DFS, there you go.
How about a wide receiver? Remember back in 2009, Jabbar Gaffney had 14 catches for 213 yards, 35.3 fantasy points. Anybody come to mind for you? They're like, yeah, that guy could be Jabbar Gaffney in 2020.
Yeah, how about Byron Pringle?
Yeah.
Or even Garrick Dieter, who
Patrick Mahomes' best friend.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So these guys, these guys may play almost every snap for the Chiefs in this game. Now, it's not going to be with Patrick Mahomes. It'll be with Chad Henne, granted. But Pringle has played 40-plus snaps in one career game. Do you remember it?
I do not.
Remember this? Last season, week 5, 9 targets, 6 catches, 103 yards, and a touchdown in that game.
Is that a Monday night game? Might have been.
I don't remember.
What the Chiefs do is the Chiefs are like, you know what we're going to do is we're going to bench Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson, 3 guys who run a 4.440, so we can replace them with Byron Pringle, our 4th wide receiver who runs a 4.440.
Right. Yeah, they seem to like speed at that position.
Yes.
So, I think he's a Hail Mary guy, certainly DFS option, and Garrick Dieter as well. He's riskier. He's only played 42 career snaps as 1 catch, but if you're going super deep, that's another guy that could play.
I love this.
And he's on the practice squad right now, so he's not even going to get signed to the active roster until Saturday at 4 p.m. most likely. So again,
he's making, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, any of you guys, but I believe this is Garrick Dieter's fantasy-focused debut being talked about on the podcast. He's got a graphic and everything, so I'm hoping for a big game for him.
I don't know. He went to Alabama, good player at the greatest college football program of the past decade. He's best friends with Patrick Mahomes. Like, this guy deserves some shine here.
How much do these kids, understanding it's like, all right, if they're going to rest everybody else, like maybe the rest of the team is going to, quote, take the week off, but this is their chance to go out and really do something.
No doubt.
I love these, in a situation like this, let's see what, Mecole Hardman or Garrick Dieter or any of these guys can do from this perspective.
That's so sweet, Daniel. You're like, these kids.
They're young. I'm like an old man now. I don't know. What do you want me to say?
Yeah.
You're like, you sound like a proud parent.
I am a proud parent. Let's see you get in the end zone, Garrick. I want to see it.
Quick one here. Blake Jarwin back in 2018 had 36.9 fantasy points. Still playing, obviously. Mike, is there a tight end you think could maybe possibly go nuts this week?
I'm sticking with him. I'm going back to the Cole Kmet well. I've been hammering this one for, a month now.
Every CSS DFS podcast, we always talk about Cole Kmet.
Hammer a well? Is that what you do?
What, hammer?
You say you're going to hammer the well? Is that what you said?
No, not well. I didn't say well.
I thought you've been hammering that well for a month now.
Hammer. I don't know. Hammering this. I don't know what I.
You know what you did? It's sitting in that chair.
Yeah,
because you did hammering the nail and going back to the well, and you mix the metaphor, and nobody mixes metaphors and screws them up better than our friend Matthew Berry.
Well, there you go.
But I know you're sitting in his chair, and so you're paying homage.
Maybe, but anyway. So of course, someone played Graham against me in a league last week. I ended up winning, but someone played him against me, and I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" He was just tearing up that game, scored 2 touchdowns. Look at this. He played about half as many snaps. ran fewer routes, had fewer targets, had fewer air yards than Cole Kmet in that game, and somehow still scored the 2 touchdowns. It was driving me up a wall. So, because I did it again.
Just finish your thought, then
I did it again.
repeat.
I know what you're going to say, but yeah. So look, Kmet is their number 1 tight end. It's going to happen at some point. I'm sticking with him. It's this week.
Well, that kind of just rewinded. It's like, yeah, so I'm playing against Cole, Jimmy Graham or Cole
I was
Kmet?
playing against Graham.
Playing against Jimmy Graham. Like, I finished with the best regular season record.
Yeah,
right.
I had the highest scoring team
Most
in the league
points
by
scored in the season.
7 points. But I'm down big in the semifinals because some guy had the audacity to start Tyreek Hill in the semifinals. Like, who starts Tyreek Hill? Like, seriously, like, what? This is the life we've shown up for, right? We've signed up for here in fantasy football. Fantasy life, what are you going to do, right?
I mean, I have a
Visit
case there.
fantasylife.com. Great gift for your dad. Use promo code Rogaine for 20%.
Oh my goodness!
I love it.
You just know Matthew's not watching. Right?
I know. It's just like, you get away with it. Oh, man.
Code Rogaine.
Yeah, sorry. Anyways, we have 3 minutes left on this podcast. It's our final podcast of 2020. And to get more serious here for a second, I wanted to take some time to say a lot of thank yous. And I want everybody to chime in if they want to add anything here. But you guys listen to this podcast every single day, and you hear myself, you hear Daniel, you hear Mike, you hear Stefania, you hear Matthew, you hear occasionally Kyle. But this operation is so much more than just the voices that you hear on the microphone. When I first started on this podcast, we sat in a studio, we turned a microphone on, and we started recording, and there was like 4 people involved in total. It has grown to an incredible operation. Kyle, who you often or occasionally I should hear, is sort of like our engine behind this podcast. The amount of research he puts into every single podcast is beyond description. The guy is just remarkable. He is our GOAT. Daniel, as you guys know, is the heartbeat of this podcast. Daniel's the heartbeat of a lot of things in life. Just an incredible person and friend. The people that you don't ever see here on the podcast or here on the podcast, Matt Harrington is in his first year producing this podcast. We were fortunate enough to grab him from the TV side to join us here on the fantasy side this year, specifically on the podcast side. He also does fantasy football now. The guy is an absolute thoroughbred producer here at ESPN. He's made us better. He's helped us be more pointed and give you the analysis that you need. We're really, really lucky to have Matt on our team this year. He oversees the side that you don't see, and we're darn lucky to have that guy leading the way for us. The director team includes Lisa and Haley and Isaac and so many more people. And you don't see what they're doing again, but they're the ones that making sure visually this podcast looks like it is supposed to do. They are incredibly patient because we can be a handful sometimes, both before, during, and after the show. So grateful for them. Adam Strain and the entire video team who cuts all the clips that you see on the app, on ESPN.com, on our Twitter feeds. They do an impeccable job getting us a ton of content out. I know I'm not leaving us a lot of time, but I want to say thank you to all those. And of course, the listeners and the viewers, you guys are everything for us. So lucky to have such a loyal audience. Thank you for an incredible, incredible year. Anybody else want to chime in the last 15 seconds we have on the show?
I can't beat that. Well said. Well said.
Just echo everything that Field said, but especially the fans. And we appreciate you sharing with us your victories and your losses because we have more empathy than anyone else out there. We're all in the same boat, and we appreciate you.
Well said by all, and thank you to everybody, Daniel.
I would say I'll just get real emotional and start crying. So I'm gonna leave it where you're at, buddy. I love you. I love everybody on this show. I really appreciate what we have here, and it's something really special, and I'm so thankful to be a part of it.
We're going to keep it going. CSS DFS is coming out in just a few hours behind us. In the meantime, we'll be back early in the new year. We'll get you an updated date at some point soon. Good luck in Week 17. We'll talk to you guys all soon. Hopefully you'll watch Fantasy Football Now, Sunday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Peace out.
Fantasy, you're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy focus.
No, that was great.